Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel for another episode of the route learning series recorded within Train Simulator. In this episode, I wanted to head down to the far southwest of England to drive a journey on a route that I haven't yet covered on this channel, and so I'm going to be driving on the Just Trains Cornish main line in a custom created scenario set in the modern day following the real-life timetable of train 1 Charlie 09, which is the 6:24 cross-country departure from Plymouth, heading down to Penzance for a total journey distance of around 79.25 miles. Our stops on this journey include Liskeard, Bodmin Parkway, St Austell, Truro, Redruth, St Erth, and finally Penzance. The train that I'm driving on this journey today probably needs little introduction on this channel, but I'm driving an HST set formed of 2 Class 43 diesel electric locomotives and 7 Mark III coaches. The coaches that I'm using are actually modified coaches to represent the fact that the slam doors have now been replaced with sliding door Mark III coaches on this route. So the Class 43 power cars were constructed by British Rail Engineering Limited between 1975 and 1982, and they've been in service in the UK since 1976, with a total of 197 of these locomotives produced. Each locomotive weighs around 70.25 tonnes, and they have a maximum speed of 125 miles per hour, though the maximum speed limit on this journey today will be 75 miles per hour, and they have a power output of 2,250 horsepower, so with both locomotives combined that gives us a maximum power output of 4,500 horsepower on this train, with a maximum tractive effort of 17,980 pounds of force, or 80 kilonewtons. Now that I've jumped into the cab of the HST, let's just quickly set up ready for departure here. And just to make you aware, I do of course have the Armstrong Powerhouse MTU enhancement pack installed, so the setup procedure is slightly more expanded over if you were using the default Coogee HST. So the first thing I need to do is press Shift and W to turn the master key. And now that I've done that, I need to move the reversing handle to the engine only position and reset the AWS self-test sequence. Okay, now that I've done that, the next thing I'm going to do is set up the lights here in the cab. So if we go over to the left-hand side of the cab, I'm going to turn the tail lights off there. I'm going to turn on the marker lights, and I'm going to press H to turn the headlight on to the daytime setting. Now that I've done that, the next thing I'm going to do is press Ctrl and D to turn on the driver safety device, and press Y to turn off the driver reminder appliance. As you can see, the signal ahead there is clear. So just to quickly mention the controls and gauges here in the cab. So if we go over to the left-hand side of the cab here, you can see the middle of the 3 gauges there is the brake cylinder pressure gauge. So the harder the brakes are applied, then the higher those needles will be pointing, and when they're pointing at 0, then the brakes are fully released. So with the HST locomotives, of course, we don't have a combined traction and brake controller like you get in modern trains, so the brake and throttle are separate controls. And here you've got the brake handle, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I think there's one more step there. Actually, we're in full service braking now, so there's 5 steps of braking, and then the next step would be the emergency step. So generally I'm going to try and not brake much above step 2 or 3 on this journey, unless I really have to, either due to a misjudgment or just because we're on quite a steep downward gradient. Now on the right hand side of the cab here, you can see we've got the throttle control, and there's 5 notches of power on this locomotive. Just above that we've got the speedometer measured in miles per hour. As already mentioned, the maximum speed for this train is 125 miles per hour, but the maximum speed limit for this journey is 75 miles per hour, and for a lot of the journey it's actually even going to be below 75. Just to the right of the speedometer there we've got the ammeter, so that's showing us how much power is being generated by the engines in the locomotive. And of course, just to the right down here we've got a 2-tone horn controllable with the space bar and the B key. Okay, so now we've had a look around the cab and we've set up the locomotive ready for departure. Let's just take another quick look outside the train, and then we can depart out on our journey towards Penzance. Departing away from Plymouth, the starting speed limit is 25 miles per hour, with around 17.7 miles to go to our first stop at Liskeard. And now that we're doing just below 25 miles per hour, I've just shut off the power for a moment, as we've just got a bit of a downgrade here that could cause us to accelerate slightly, so I just want to ensure that we don't break the speed limit. The speed limit's now increasing to 40 miles per hour, and we can accelerate towards that in a moment, just as we've crossed a bridge which is coming up. I think I can see it coming up just ahead there. So as soon as we cross that bridge, I'm going to go up to full power to start accelerating up towards 40. There's going to be a bit of an upward gradient here towards the first station out of Plymouth, which is Devonport, an upgrade of around 1 in 100. And now that we're approaching 40 miles per hour, I've just cut the power back to notch 2 and now notch 1 to maintain the speed here. So you just need to go between notches 1 and 2 to hold as close to 40 as you can. We're now coming up on Devonport Station. Straight after Devonport Station, we then pass through this short tunnel, and just after the tunnel the speed limit's then going up to 50 miles per hour, and we're actually at the start of a long down gradient, so I'm not going to give us any power to accelerate up towards 50. Instead, I'm just going to allow the train to coast up towards 50, so I'm just giving us a little bit of power until the full train's crested that hill, and now let's just let the train coast up towards 50 miles per hour. We're now coming up on Dockyard Station. As we get closer to 50 miles per hour along here, I'm just going to keep an eye on the speed and use the brakes to control the speed as required, just to ensure that we don't break that speed limit. We're now coming up on Keyham Station with around 1 mile to go to an upcoming 40 mile per hour speed limit. The gradient is now levelling out, and you can see that gradient change there. And as we reach this bridge that we're about to cross in a moment, we've then got around half a mile to go to the upcoming 40 limit. And at this point we've also got around 1 mile to go to an upcoming 15 mile per hour speed limit. I'm just going to allow the train to continue to coast along here as we're about to start on an upward gradient of 1 in 63 towards the next signal. The speed limit comes into force around the area of the next signal, but I'm just allowing the train to coast down towards 40, and I'll use the brakes as we get closer to that speed limit if we need to do so, but I think we should be able to coast down in time. Now coming up on St Bordeaux Station. If I pronounce that correctly, it could be St Bordeaux. I'm not quite sure. I think it's St Bordeaux. So we're now down to 40 miles per hour in time. We're now entering the 40 mile per hour speed zone, and we're going to be entering a single track section here. The AWS there is warning us of the upcoming 15 mile per hour speed limit, but we are on an uphill gradient which is causing us to lose speed quite quickly along here. But I'm just going to allow the train now to coast down towards 15, and then the gradient will level out before we get to that 15 limit, so I will still need to use some limited braking to make sure that we're down to that speed in time. So we've now coasted down to around 25 miles per hour, and that 15 mile per hour speed limit is going to be coming into force in a moment on this left-hand curve, so I'm just looking out for that speed post now. So now down to 15 miles per hour. I'm just going to give us a notch of power just to ensure that we don't slow down too much. And then on this bridge we need to go pretty much between idle and notch 1 of power to maintain the speed. So we're now crossing the River Tamar via the Royal Albert Bridge, of course, as you can see written on the bridge here, built by the great Victorian engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel in 1859. And at this point we're actually crossing from the county of Devon into the county of Cornwall, which we'll be in for the rest of the journey towards Penzance. As we reach the end of the bridge here, we're just going to be on an upward gradient, so I'm going to need to give us some power to ensure that we don't lose too much speed. And then the speed limit's going to go up to 55 miles per hour just as we leave the bridge. There's actually going to be a downgrade before the rear of the train has cleared that 55 speed post, so you just want to be careful to ensure that you don't end up accelerating too quickly. So we're now coming up on Saltash station, and you can see the 55 speed post there just before we enter the platform. So we've now started on the downward gradient that I mentioned. It's actually going to help our acceleration here quite significantly. I'm just waiting now until we reach the HST stop marker, the first of the two that you can see on the left just now. At this point I now know that the rear of the train has cleared the 55 mile per hour speed board, and so I'm going to accelerate up towards that. As already mentioned, the downward gradient here will significantly aid with our acceleration, so we should be able to get up to speed quite quickly. And then I'm going to shut the power off at just below 50 miles per hour and let the train continue to coast, just to ensure that we don't break the speed limit. At this point we've got around 13.3 miles to go. So we're now approaching 55 miles per hour. I'm just using some brakes just to ensure that we don't break that speed limit. And now the speed limit's just increased further up towards 70 miles per hour, as well as the gradient levelling out at this point, and then we're going to start on an upward gradient very soon. So along here we've got a bit of a varying gradient, and we need to go between notches 1 and 3 of power to maintain the speed. So it's just a case of setting the throttle at a certain notch and seeing what's happening on the speedometer, and then making the adjustments as necessary. So we're getting towards 70 miles per hour now. I've just cut back to notch 3 and we're still accelerating. So now I'm going to cut back to notch 2 and notch 1 just to try and ensure. In fact, it looks like we're still accelerating. So just idled for a moment. And now I can clearly see the gradient just changed to a slight upward gradient there. So let's just give us some power back. Initially in notch 2, but we're actually losing more speed than I thought. So now up to notch 3. As we pass through this tunnel, we've got around 10.5 miles to go to Liskeard, and there's a bit of a downgrade leaving the tunnel, so I'm just, I've idled the power at this point. I'm allowing the train to coast, and I'll use some brakes if necessary as we leave the tunnel. And the gradient has now changed again. At this point we've got around 1.2 miles to go to an upcoming 50 mile per hour speed limit. So notch 1 of power has been holding us fairly close to 70 along this stretch. Then I'm going to shut off the power as we've got a warning for the upcoming 50 speed limit that I mentioned. So I'm just going to allow the train to coast for a moment, just until we get to the next underbridge. And then I'm going to start applying the brakes to slow us down in time for the 50 limit. So just coming up on that bridge now. So I'm just going to make an initial light brake application, step 2, which should bring our speed down quite nicely. So we're now down to 50 in time, and now I'm just going to go between idle and notch 1 of power to try and hold us as close to 50 as I can. We're now coming up on St Germans station with around 8.5 miles to go. The speed limit's now going up to 65 miles per hour, and we're also at the start of a steep upgrade of 1 in 78. So at this point I can go straight to full power to accelerate up towards 65, and then once we're at 65 I need to go between notches 3 and 4 of power to try and maintain that speed. As you can see, the gradient is significantly affecting our acceleration, and we're really struggling to get that speed even in full power, though we will be able to reach 65. One thing to always mention on this route particularly is you do need to look out for the constant gradient changes that exist. And that's the real challenge, as I say, of driving this route. It's just driving manually, trying to maintain a speed using the throttle and the brakes, and also coasting where necessary to try and save as much energy and fuel as possible. So I think the gradient did just change there a little, so I'm just cutting the power back a bit now to ensure that we don't break 65 miles per hour. So I see we just accidentally got slightly above 65 there. I think I got to 66, maybe 67, so a little bit of braking, and I've completely shut off the power for a moment, just to ensure that we don't continue speeding like that. So at this left-hand curve here, with the power lines that you can see there, so you've got an overbridge at the start of the curve with the power lines just ahead. We've got around 1.5 miles to go to an upcoming 60 mile per hour speed limit. These two overbridges in close proximity, we've now got around a mile to go to the upcoming 60 limit. I'm just going to shut off the power now and allow the train to coast down towards 60. So at those overbridges we also had around 5 miles to go to Liskeard. So just past the warning for the upcoming 60 limit, which is around half a mile from that speed limit itself, and we're continuing to coast down towards 60. Though again, I'll add some braking if necessary as we get closer to the speed post. The 60 limit comes into force just after crossing a bridge on a left-hand curve coming up here. So just reached that bridge, you can now see that speed post, and I've applied step 1 braking just to ensure that we were down to 60 in time. There's now no further speed changes between here and Liskeard station. So at the 60 limit we had around 4 miles to go. We're now coming up on Meneniot station. And straight after Meneniot station, we've got a steep upgrade, so I'm now needing to go between notches 3 and 4 of power to hold us as close to 60 as I can. As always with these videos, just to say I hope I'm getting these pronunciations correct. I actually looked up some of the pronunciations for the places on this route. I did know some already because I have travelled on this route in real life. At least between Plymouth and Liskeard, I haven't actually gone any further on the Cornish main line than Liskeard. But yeah, I do apologise if I'm getting any of the pronunciations wrong, and you're welcome to correct me in the comments, as always. So I just thought we were accelerating slightly too quickly there. I'll just cut the power back to notch 2. And we're slowing down in notch 2, so now back up to notch 3. And if that causes us to start accelerating, then I'm just going to balance it between notches 2 and 3 of power. And we were still slowing down in notch 3, so now back up to notch 4 of power. The gradient does vary on this route so much that it's difficult to tell you what the gradient is at any given moment, and that's why I say you really do need to keep a close eye on the speed and adjust the throttle as necessary. I think the more you drive this route, the more practiced you get, then the less you would have to do that. But for these videos, I don't drive these routes half as much as a real train driver would, and although I try to do things as accurate as I can, I certainly don't do things perfectly. So at the AWS just there, which is the first one outside of Menenia, we've got around 1.2 miles to go, and at this point I'm just going to shut off the power and allow the train to coast. We're now going to be on a downgrade towards Liskeard station, which is steepening as we cross this bridge, so I'm just going to give us a little bit of braking to ensure that we don't break that 60 speed limit. And I'm going to apply the brakes for our stop between steps 2 and 3, just as we've passed this next signal here. You can now see the platform at Liskeard coming up just ahead, so I've increased the braking. You do need to bear in mind, of course, that we are on a downhill grade, which is affecting our acceleration. The grade does level out just before we enter the platform. I don't really want to enter the platform any faster than around 30 miles per hour, and here at Liskeard we need to stop at the 2+7 HST stop marker, which is right near the end of the platform. So you can see that the stop marker's just past the signal. It's the first of the 2 white markers you can see on the left hand side. And if I stop about here, we should now be stopping in just about the right place. As we depart away from Liskeard, the speed limit here is 60 miles per hour, with around 9 miles to go to the next stop, which is Bodmin Parkway. Departing away from Bodmin Parkway, the gradient now changes to a downward gradient, which will significantly aid with our acceleration as we head up towards 60 miles per hour, but it's not a long downgrade, so it just helps us in the short term. I'm going to cut off the power at just below 60 miles per hour, just to ensure that we don't break that speed limit here, and then the gradient's going to level out, and we're going to start on a steep upward gradient once again, shortly after crossing a viaduct. In fact, the downgrade has ended already. We've got the viaduct now that we're crossing, and the upgrade starts shortly after crossing the viaduct here. I do realise that we just reached 60 miles per hour. In fact, we reached 61 miles per hour. I think I'll be written up for this journey in reality. I just need to be a little bit more careful and cut off the power slightly before we've reached that speed limit. So yeah, we're now starting on this upward gradient, and I need to go between notches 3 and 4 of power to try and maintain the speed along here. As we pass the buildings here on the right hand side, we've got around 7.5 miles to go. So as we pass this 3-arched overbridge just there, we've got a short steep down gradient just after. So I've just cut off the power for a moment just to allow the train to coast so that I can control the speed and use the brakes if necessary. So we've got a warning there for a 45/60 speed limit, which doesn't apply to us, but it is 1.5 miles from an upcoming 40 speed limit, which does apply to us. We're actually on quite a steep upward grade here, so I'm increasing the power quite high just to ensure that we don't lose too much speed. Okay, so we've just passed that 45/60 limit itself, and in a moment we're going to have a 40 mile per hour warning for the upcoming 40 limit. So I've just cut off the power as we're now starting on a steep downward gradient towards that 40 mile per hour speed limit. So I'm just going to allow the train to coast along here, and now we've come up on that warning, I'm going to start braking to bring our speed down. The 40 limit actually comes into force as we enter a single track section, which is about a mile long, which is coming up in a moment. So we're now down to 40 miles per hour. I've slowed just to a little bit below that to ensure that we weren't going to end up breaking the speed limit. The gradient has now levelled out for a moment. It's actually going to be going down once again, and the 40 mile per hour speed limit comes into force just here, just before we cross the points onto the right hand track. Immediately after crossing these points, the speed limit's then going up to 55 miles per hour. We are still on a downward gradient along here, so now I'm just going to cut off the power as we're doing just over 50 miles per hour and then use the brakes to control the speed as required. Track now doubles once again, although we are still on a downward gradient, so we do still need to use the brakes to control the speed at this point. Passing one of Great Western Railway's Castle Class HSTs, which is a specially shortened set with sliding door Mark III coaches, which is in use on the Cornish main line, and a lot of the local services, from what I'm seeing in the timetable, that used to be operated by, for example, Class 158s or Class 150s, such as the Penzance to Cardiff journey. So I'm continuing to use the brakes to control the speed for now, and just as we cross this bridge here, the speed limit is now going up to 60 miles per hour. So we can just now allow the train to coast up towards 60 on this downgrade, and then again use the brakes to control the speed once we've reached 60. There is a gradient change to an upgrade along here, and I'm not sure if it's happened yet or not, so I'm keeping an eye on it. I don't think it has, looking at the speedometer. I think it's just after crossing this bridge here that the gradient's going to start going up in a moment. We are still gaining that little bit of speed, so again I'm still using the brakes to control the speed. So it's actually after this viaduct that we crossed just here, the gradient is now going up, and you can actually see that gradient change. But it's only a short upward gradient before we start back on a downgrade again. So for this point, I'm just going to allow the train to coast. We will lose a bit of speed, but we'll very quickly gain it back again. And at the phone mast that we just passed on the left-hand side there, we've had around 1.5 miles to go. What I'm looking out for along here now is a warning for an upcoming 50 mile per hour speed limit, which comes into force just before our stop at Bodmin Parkway. And at the 50 warning, that's the braking point that I'm going to use to slow down for our stop. We are back on that downward gradient again as well, so I am using the brakes once again to control the speed along here. So we've just reached that 50 warning. I've made an initial step 2, now going up to step 3 brake application due to the steepness of the downgrade here, which should bring our speed off quite nicely. At Bodmin Parkway station, I need to stop at the HST 2+7 marker once again, which is at the end of the platform. I reduced the braking momentarily as I thought we might be slowing down a little bit too quickly. And now we're entering that 50 mile per hour speed zone, and you can see the platform coming up just ahead. I mentioned that it's the HST 2+7 marker, but at this station it appears that it's just an HST stop sign. So for all length HSTs they need to stop right next to that sign, and we should now be stopping in just about the right place. Departing away from Bodmin Parkway, the speed limit here is 50 miles per hour, though immediately going up to 65 miles per hour, with around 12.3 miles to go to the next stop, which is St Austell. Like with the previous stop, there is a steep downgrade here just after departure, which is helping us with acceleration. I'm going to idle the power at just below 60 miles per hour. So I've just shut off the power now to allow the train to coast. We continued accelerating up towards 65. Now I'm going to need to use the brakes in a moment to control the speed, just to ensure that we don't break that speed limit. And the gradient is now changing, and we've now got a level gradient here at the leaf forewarning sign just there. But that's only a very short level gradient. We're going to go through this tunnel and then the gradient's going to start going down once again. So now have a warning for a speed limit which doesn't apply to us, 55 over 65. We're back on a down gradient, so I'm just going to use the brakes again to control the speed at this point. I think that downward gradient may have ended now. I'm just keeping an eye on our speed just to see what happens. Yeah, we are in fact losing a little bit of speed, so I'm just going to increase the power now up to notch 2 just to bring us back up towards 65. As we pass this speed post just here, which as already mentioned doesn't apply to us, we've got around 1 mile to go to an upcoming 45 mile per hour speed limit, which certainly does apply to us. At this point I'm just going to allow the train to coast along here, and I'm going to be looking out for that 45 warning. So I've just made a step 2 brake application to start bringing our speed down. We're now passing Lostwithiel goods loops. And the speed limit's just about to drop to 45, and I've got down to 45 in time, so I'm just going to allow the train to coast along here. You can see that speed post coming up just ahead. And then shortly after passing the speed post, we're then going to be passing through Lostwithiel station. At Lostworth Hill Station we had around 9 miles to go, and the speed limit immediately went up to 55 miles per hour as we passed through the platform there. And we've got a steep upward gradient now just after passing this junction of around 1 in 57. So I'm just accelerating in full power up towards 55, and then I need to go between notches 3 and 4 of power to try and maintain that speed. Just cutting the power back now. I cut it back a little bit more than I needed to, as I just thought we might be gaining a bit too much speed along here. So this speed warning again doesn't apply to us. It's a 40/65 warning, but what it does indicate, of course, that for us, because we're taking the highest speed limit, that the speed limit will shortly be going up to 65 miles per hour. Speed limit's now increasing to 65, and then we're going to be coming up on a tunnel in a moment. As we pass through the tunnel, we've got around 7 miles to go. So we're still on this steep upward gradient. That's now going to change to a steep downward gradient as we leave this tunnel here. So I'm just cutting the power back now. The downward gradient's going to be 1 in 62, so the train should very quickly pick up speed. And then I'll use the brakes to control the speed as required. We've now got a warning for an upcoming 55 mile per hour speed limit, just over half a mile from the speed limit itself. So I'm just going to use a step 1 to step 2 brake application to bring our speed down. And that 55 mile per hour speed zone is actually very short, with the speed limit immediately going back up to 60. So yeah, I'm just making this harder brake application due to the downgrade here. I wanted to ensure that we're down to that speed in time. So we've now just passed the 55 mile per hour speed post, immediately followed by the 60 mile per hour speed post, which is immediately followed by Parr Station, with around 4.5 miles to go. So we've got a short steep upward gradient just after passing through Parr Station, which then changes to a downgrade just beyond the next signal. So I've just cut the power back now just to ensure that we don't end up breaking the speed limit, and I'll now shut the power off completely and use the brakes to control the speed. The speed limit's now going up further to 65 miles per hour with around 3.7 miles to go. And the gradient's now going to be changing once again to a steep upward gradient, so I now need to give us some power to ensure that we don't lose too much speed along here. And we need to go between notches 2 and 4 of power at around 65 miles per hour due to the varying gradient along here. As you can now see the triangular warning post on the opposite track with the houses just there on the right hand side. We've got around 1.6 miles to go, and at the next signal we've got around 1 mile to go. So we've now got around 1 mile to go. I'm going to idle the power at the next overbridge, and I'm going to apply the brakes as we approach a green coloured overbridge, which will be coming up shortly. So we've just got the next overbridge there, and then you can see there's another one in between here and the green one, and then you can see that green one in the distance there. So as we approach that overbridge, I'm going to start applying the brakes for our stop. The steep upward gradient that we've got along here will aid with our braking, and we're going to be on an upward gradient right until we enter the platform. Speeds come off quite nicely, and here at St Austell station we do need to stop at the 2+7 HST stop marker, which is just beyond the end of the platform. As you can see here, we are still losing speed even with the brakes released, just due to the upward gradient, which has levelled out. So the front of the train's now on a level gradient, but the rear of the train is still on that upward gradient, and you do need to bear that in mind when departing away from here. So definitely apply power before releasing the brakes, just to ensure that you don't end up rolling back. And that stop marker's just coming up on the left-hand side now. So if I apply the brakes just here, we should now be stopping in just about the right place. Departing away from St Austell, the speed limit here is 65 miles per hour, with around 14.4 miles to go to the next stop, which is Truro. We are on an upward gradient almost immediately after departure away from St Austell, which is affecting our acceleration, and then the gradient is going to shallow and then steepen once again. And we're going to be on an upward gradient for a good couple of miles now. This next signal just coming up, we've got around 12.6 miles to go. And as we're approaching 65 miles per hour, I'm now just reducing the power just to ensure that we don't end up breaking the speed limit. So I'm in notch 2 of power, and it looks like we might be losing a little bit of speed, so I'm just increasing to notch 3. I am looking out for any gradient changes along here, and the gradient is levelling out shortly. In fact, I think the gradient may have levelled out already, and we're now coming up on Burngullow sidings, with the gradient soon changing to a steep downgrade. So at this point I'm just shutting off the power to allow the train to coast, and then I'll use the brakes to control the speed as we start on that downward gradient. And you can see there a very visible grade change, so we have now started on that downward gradient. And I'll just use step 1 of braking as required, just to ensure that we don't brake 65 miles per hour. So the gradient is varying along here, in varying degrees of steepness and a downward direction at the minute. So I'm just continuing to use the brakes, but also bearing in mind that there will be a couple of level gradients along here. And it's very difficult to tell when the gradient has changed, other than looking at what's going on with the speedometer, unless it's one of those very visible gradient changes that we've seen a couple of on this journey. As we cross this viaduct here, we've got around 9.5 miles to go, and the gradient's now shallowing, so I need to use notch 1 of power to help us maintain the speed here. And then in about a mile or so, the gradient's going to be steepening. I'm going to be on quite a steep upward gradient. I'm just going to go up to notch 2 of power just for a moment, just because I feel like we might be losing a little bit too much speed here. So we've got some houses on the right there next to an overbridge. At this point the gradient is going to steepen, but then what I'm looking out for after that is another overbridge with some houses, and at that point the grade is going to change to a downgrade, and we're going to have to use the brakes to control the speed once again. For now I'm in notch 1 of power, and that seems to be holding us fairly close to 65, but we are losing a little bit, so I'm just increasing up to notch 2 for a moment. Just got up to notch 3 of power now, as we were still losing a bit too much speed on this upward gradient. And we're now reaching that next overbridge with those houses on the right, so in a moment I'm just going to wait till we're a little bit beyond the bridge before cutting off the power, because as I said, in a moment there will be a downgrade beginning. So at this second overbridge with the houses on the right hand side, we've got around 7.5 miles to go. And now the downgrade is beginning, so I've just shut off the power, and now I'm preparing to use step 1 of braking once again to ensure that we don't break that 65 speed limit. And the downgrade along here at present is 1 in 67. At this upcoming signal, we've got around 6.8 miles to go. I think we just reached 66 miles an hour again, so I just increased the braking very slightly. This signal, we've got around 5.5 miles to go. We're still on this steep downward gradient, but the gradient will be levelling out just before the next signal. So I think I could see there was a bit of a gradient change just there, and indeed we've just reached that next signal, so the gradient has now changed. At this signal we've got around 4.5 miles to go, with an upgrade coming shortly after passing that signal, where I need to go between notches 2 and 3 of power to try and maintain the speed on that upward gradient. Starting to lose speed, so I'm going up to notch 3 of power, and the gradient will steepen even further, and we may even need notch 4 of power to try and ensure that we don't lose too much speed. As we come into this tunnel here, the gradient is going to level out as we enter the tunnel, so I'm just going to start shutting down the power now and allow the train to coast along here. And there will be a downgrade shortly after we've exited the tunnel. At the tunnel exit itself, we've got around 2.9 miles to go to Truro. And now we're starting on that downward gradient, so I'm just going to use the brakes to control the speed once again. The gradient's now changing to an upward gradient, a steep upward gradient of 1 in 82, so we need to go between notches 3 and 4 of power to maintain the speed. Out the tunnel that you can see coming up just ahead, we've got around 1.5 miles to go. The speed warning there for a 40 over 65 doesn't apply to us, but there will be a 30 mile per hour speed limit coming into force just before our stop. So as we leave this tunnel, we're going to be entering a steep downward gradient. I've just shut off the power now to allow the train to coast, and I'll use the brakes if necessary to control the speed. At the next signal coming up, we've got around 1.3 miles to go. So we've now got a warning for the upcoming 30 mile per hour speed limit that I mentioned a moment ago. This warning is 0.8 miles from the speed limit itself. Now approaching a large viaduct, and I'm going to increase the braking up to step 3, which should hopefully bring our speed down in time. The 30 limit comes into force a bit after the viaduct as we approach the next right-hand curve. And you can see there's a gradient change immediately after the viaduct as well, so whilst we are still currently on a downward gradient, that gradient will be levelling out as we get. So I said levelling out, we'll actually be changing to an upgrade of 1 in 121 just before we reach Truro. Now you can see the platform coming up just ahead. Here at Truro station, I need to stop at the end of the platform. And we should now be stopping in just about the right place. Departing away from Truro, the speed limit here was 30 miles per hour, though immediately went up to 60 miles per hour as we departed away from the platform, with around 9 miles to go to the next stop, which is Redruth. Shortly after departure away from Truro, we have here now a 1 in 85 upward gradient, which is affecting our acceleration. Then we're going to pass through this short tunnel, and then shortly after that, the gradient will be levelling out once again. So the gradient has now just levelled out once again, and we're going to accelerate fairly quickly up towards 60 miles per hour. And then there will be another upward gradient of 1 in 80 coming up quite shortly, and at that point I'm then going to need to go between notches 3 and 4 of power to maintain our speed at around 60. So I've just cut the power back for a moment just due to the level grade, and now it looks like, I think there, I could see a visible grade change as we started on this upward gradient here. So I'm just going to see what happens to the speed now. And then as we start to lose speed, I'll add the power just to ensure that we don't lose too much. So we've got a single yellow signal here, and it's only around just over half a mile between the signal sections, so I'm immediately applying the brakes to bring our speed down, and we are on an upward gradient here still, which will of course help with our braking. One thing I would say is if you get cautionary signals on this route, I find it very difficult to see what aspect the signal's displaying until you're pretty much right on top of it, so do be very careful not to spad, as I almost did on some of the practice runs on this journey. We're actually following a slightly delayed sleeper service, the Cornish Riviera sleeper from London Paddington to Penzance that runs overnight, with a class 57 hauling a rake of Mark III coaches. I can now see the signal coming up just ahead is displaying a red aspect, so I'm bringing our speed down now to stop just in front of the signal. If we do have to stop here, And I need to bear in mind that we are still on a 1 in 80 upward gradient, which means that I have to apply, I would say, notch 3 of power really before releasing the brakes to move off. So I was just crawling up towards the signal. Of course we're slowing down due to the upgrade, and now I'll put on some brakes just to ensure that we don't end up rolling back. Hopefully it shouldn't take too long for the signal to clear. It's actually a very long signal section here, which is over 6 miles long, so that train's actually probably already departed Redruth station, but we've just got to wait until that train clears the next signal section ahead before we're clear to proceed on further. And the signal has now just cleared, so let's give us some power. As I said, I'm going to go up to notch 3 of power before releasing the brakes, because I really don't want to roll back here. And now if I release the brakes, we should move forward without any rollback, which we are now doing just. It's certainly not very quick to move off here due to the upward gradient. So with this signal now cleared to green, we are now cleared all of the way to Redruth station, which is around 6 miles away. So just after that whistle post, the grade changes to a downgrade, and then we're changing back to an upgrade of 1 in 71. You can see there quite a visible grade change as we've now changed back to the upgrade, and as I said, we're now on a 1 in 71 upgrade, and as we get to 60 I need to go between notches 3 and 4 of power to maintain the speed. You can now see a very visible grade change here, and we're now changing to a downward gradient, so I'm now going to use the brakes for some speed control here. We're going to be on a downgrade for quite some time, so we're going to have to continue to use the brakes to control that speed. We're now passing the site of a closed station. I'm not sure what the station is, but I'm hoping to caption it in during the editing process for this video. And just as we've passed through this station here, the grade's now changing to an upward gradient once again. So I need to give us a bit of power. And at the next speed post just coming up, the speed limit's now increasing to 70 miles per hour, which is the fastest speed limit since between Plymouth and Liskeard. As the speed limit went up to 70, we had 3.6 miles to go. You can see there on the left hand side what appears to be some kind of a ruined building. I'm not sure what that is, but if you do know then please let me know in the comments. But at that point the gradient's now changing to a downgrade, so I've just shut off the power at this point to allow the train to coast, and as we passed that building we had around 2.6 miles to go. So right now we're coasting up towards 70 miles per hour. I'm now going to use the brakes to control the speed a little, and then the gradient will be changing soon. It's going to level out and then change to an up 1 in 106 gradient. Now this overbridge just coming up at the start of the left-hand curve, we've got around 1.2 miles to go. I'm just going to shut off the power at this point to allow the train to coast. What I'm looking out for along here now is an upcoming warning for a 40 mile per hour speed limit, which comes into force just before the stop, and I'm going to apply the brakes for Redruth station as we pass that 40 warning. So I've just reached the 40 warning now, and I've made a step 2 brake application to start bringing our speed off, and that should bring the speed off quite nicely. Just reduced the braking to step 1 as I felt we were slowing down slightly too quickly. The 40 mile per hour speed limit comes into force immediately before passing through this short tunnel, and the platform is immediately at the exit to the tunnel here. Here at Redruth station I want to stop at the end of the platform. Might be coming in just slightly too quickly, so I've been increasing the braking there, and we're up to step 4 now, which I think is going to slow us down about right. Now let's just reduce the braking slightly, and just to bring us to a smoother stop, and we should now be stopping in just about the right place. Departing away from Redruth, the speed limit here is 40 miles per hour, though soon going up to 60 miles per hour, with around 11 miles to go to the next stop, which is Erth. So I'm just accelerating between notches 3 and 4 of power up towards 40 miles per hour. I just want to ensure that we don't reach 40 before the rear of the train has cleared this 60 mile per hour speed post just here. And now if I throttle up at this point, by the time the rear of the train has cleared, we should be absolutely fine. We shouldn't reach 40 until that's happened. a short downward gradient, which is aiding our acceleration at this point. And then the gradient's going to change in a moment to a level gradient, and you can see that grade change coming up just ahead. So I'm just cutting the power back now, and I've cut to idle. I think we might still be on a slight downgrade, so I just applied some slight braking there. Now let's just see what happens with our speed along here. So the grade had levelled out. I'm currently in notch 1 of power, which seems to be holding us quite well at just below 60 miles per hour. In a moment, the speed limit will be increasing further to 70 miles per hour, and due to the start of a downgrade here, I'm just going to allow the train to coast up towards 70. So we've just entered a bit of a downgrade. I'm going to use the brakes to control the speed. I'm just looking out for that 70 mile per hour speed post at present. In fact, I thought the 70 speed post was slightly before it is, so I'm just keeping an eye out for it just ahead, and the gradient has now levelled out again for a moment. So I've just given us a little bit of power just to bring our speed back. And we've now reached that 70 mile per hour speed post, so at this point I'm going to allow the train to coast up towards 70 and then use the brakes to control the speed as necessary. Okay, so we've now got a yellow signal, and this is the signal before Cambourne Station, which means we've got 1.2 miles to go to that upcoming signal. And I'll start slowing down for that signal properly as we pass through Cambourne Station. So now passing Cambourne Station with 7.5 miles to go to St Erth, and at this point around 0.8 miles to go to the next signal. So I was making a step 2 brake application pretty much from Cambourne Station. We are still on a downward grade, which is of course affecting our braking, so we're not slowing down quite as quickly as we could do. And just coming up you can see some white posts on the left hand side of the track, which are distance markers from the upcoming signal. I think it's measured in hundreds of yards, so the first one is 300 yards away, then 200, then 100, and then the signal itself. I'm trying to see what aspect that signal's displaying, but right now I still can't see it ahead. It's one of the things I've noticed with this route, as I mentioned earlier, is just that it's really difficult to see the signals until you're right on top of them. And in fact the AWS went off just as I could see the signal light there, so we've now got a clear signal and we can start powering up once again to accelerate back up towards the 70 mile per hour speed limit. I say 70 mile per hour speed limit, but actually we've only got around half a mile to go to an upcoming 60 mile per hour speed limit. So I'm going to shut off the power around 55 and then use the brakes to control the speed at that point. So the speed limit's just dropped to 60 miles per hour and we've got just under a mile to go to an upcoming 50 mile per hour speed limit. And you can see ahead a very significant gradient change, so we're changing from the steep downgrade that we've been on to a shallow upward grade. And coming up now is the warning for the upcoming 50 mile per hour speed limit, which is around half a mile from the limit itself. So I'm just going to make a step 1 brake application just after passing the warning as we enter this left hand curve, and that should bring us down to 50 in time. So we're now down to 50 miles per hour and you can see the speed post coming up just ahead. So I'm just going to allow the train to coast along here for now. When I say coast, I will give us notch 1 of power if necessary if we lose too much speed. We're now coming up on what appears to be the site of another closed station. Immediately as we passed through the closed station there, the speed limit went up to 65 miles per hour, with around 5 miles to go. It gave us a little bit of power, though we're actually now starting on a downward gradient, so I'm just going to shut off the power at just below 60 miles per hour and allow the train to coast. So now the train's coasting up towards 65 and I'll use the brakes to control the speed if necessary. What I'm looking out for now is an upcoming 60 mile per hour speed warning, which is 1 mile from the limit itself. So we're now passing that 60 mile per hour speed warning, with 3.6 miles to go to our stop and 1 mile to the upcoming limit. I'm going to be crossing a viaduct in a moment, and then I'm just going to apply the brakes very lightly to bring our speed off just after we've crossed the viaduct here. Speed limit's now dropping to 60 miles per hour with around 1 mile to go to an upcoming 45 mile per hour speed limit and 2.6 miles to go to our stop. I believe we are still on the downward gradient, so I'm still having to use the brakes to control the speed along here. What I'm looking out for now is the warning for the upcoming 45 mile per hour speed limit, which should be coming up any moment now, and then I'm going to make a step 2 brake application as we pass the warning just to bring our speed down in time. coming up on Hale Station, and just as we reach the far end of the platform, that's when the 45 mph speed limit comes into force, and the gradient also levels out at this point. So we've now slowed down to 45 in time for that limit, and then in a moment the speed limit will be increasing to 75 miles per hour, and as it does so we've got around 1.4 miles to go to St Erth. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to increase the power. Obviously I'm not going to be able to accelerate up to 75 before we have to slow down for our stop. I'm just going to power up in full power now and accelerate towards the next AWS ramp, and then as we reach that I will shut off the power and allow the train to coast. So we just reached that AWS ramp and now shut off the power to allow the train to coast. I'll apply the brakes in a moment. You can see a very long overbridge coming up just ahead, so I'm going to apply the brakes as we reach that long overbridge, and we'll go between steps 2 and 3 of braking to bring our speed down. So at the braking point there, and I've made an initial step 2 brake application, which has brought our speed down quite nicely. Here at St Erth Station I want to stop at the end of the platform. In fact, we're slowing down slightly too quickly, so I've just completely released the brakes for a moment. I'm just going to coast towards the station. Really, I could have braked probably a few seconds later than that bridge. We are on a bit of an upward gradient as well, so we are losing a bit of speed. So I'm just going to give us just temporarily 1 notch of power. And now I'll shut that power off and just coast into the platform. And as I said, I need to stop at the end of the platform. So if we stop here, right just beyond the end there, we should be stopping in just about the right place. Departing away from St Erth, the speed limit here is 75 miles per hour, with around 5.6 miles to go to the next and final stop, which is Penzance. And immediately after departure here, the gradient changed to an up 1 in 70 gradient, which is affecting our acceleration, but then the gradient is going to change to a downward gradient very shortly, and we will need to shut off the power before we reach 75 miles per hour, just to ensure that we can control the speed along here. quite a visible gradient change there, so we're definitely on that downward gradient now, and I'm going to shut off the power around 71 to 72 miles per hour. So we have now managed to reach 75 miles per hour, the very fastest speed we can get to on this journey. It's just a shame that that speed limit, of course, is right at the very end of the journey. I do love driving trains at speeds 90 miles per hour plus, or even better, 100 miles per hour plus, but for this journey I find it quite enjoyable because there's a lot of challenge to it, and the speed limits don't seem too slow. I just wish that they were that little bit quicker than they were. Gradients now levelling out as we reach this diagonal overbridge that you can see coming up just here, and we've got around 1 mile to go to an upcoming 50 mile per hour speed limit. So I'm just going to allow the train to coast along here for now. We've now reached the warning for the 50 limit, which is 0.7 miles from the limit itself. And so I'm just going to make a light brake application now, and I'll increase the braking as we get closer to the next signal. I accidentally caught the B key twice there, so I thought, hey, let's sound the horn twice. But yeah, we're now down to 50 miles per hour in time. I'm just going to allow the train to coast along here for now. That signal just there is displaying a single yellow aspect, which means that the signal just outside Penzance, guarding the station, is currently displaying a red aspect. So we're now on a single track section as we pass the depot there on the right hand side. The speed limit has gone up to 70 miles per hour, but there's very little point in accelerating because we've got to slow down fairly quickly after this. As the speed limit dropped to 50, we had 1.7 miles to go. At the yellow signal, we had 1.2 miles to go to the following signal, and also there's a 15 mile per hour speed limit, which we've got the warning for just here, which comes into force around the area of the next signal. So that warning marks 0.8 miles to go to the next signal, which currently I have to assume is displaying a red aspect until proven otherwise. So I've just been bringing our speed down quite gently for that upcoming red signal. I'm not sure exactly where the signal is. I know it's along here, not too far away. So I want to be going slow enough that if it's red, I'm able to stop in time. And as you can see, it is displaying a red aspect. In fact, what I found is that this signal is stuck at red. It's one of those that can happen when you're building a scenario, especially after following another train. So in a moment I'm going to have to request permission to pass the signal at danger. But just to try and do this realistically, just to do so, I'm going to stop the train right in front of the signal here and then press tab to request that permission to proceed. So now we've stopped the train, press tab, request the pass signal at danger approved, and now we can proceed. And as you can see, we've got a platform indicator above the signal, indicating that we are cleared into platform 3. So I'm just going to accelerate us up to 15 miles per hour, and then I'm going to shut off the power and allow the train to coast. We shouldn't need any more power then between here and stopping in Penzance station, and in fact you can see the station coming up just ahead. I just realised I didn't shut off the power quite quickly enough, so I applied some braking where I probably shouldn't have needed to. Really, you want to shut off the power a good few seconds before you want to be in idle. And I shut off there just as we'd reached 15, rather than shutting off at, say, 13 to 14 miles per hour. So yeah, you can see the platform coming up just ahead. You've got the sort of overall roof bit, and then in the platform on the far right-hand side, you've actually got the sleeper train that we've been following since Truro. So I've just brought us down to 10 miles per hour for entering the platform, and now I'm just going to coast towards the buffers. And I want to stop just as the buffer stops have disappeared into the bottom of the driver's windscreen there. I don't know why I called it a driver's windscreen, it's just the windscreen, but hey ho. Okay, so if we stop here, we should now be stopped in just about the right place. And here we are, arrival at Penzance. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, then please don't forget to like and subscribe. And for the latest channel updates, you can find me on Facebook with the link to my Facebook page in the video description. And if you're interested in supporting this channel on Patreon to help me get more DLC and produce a wider range of videos, then please follow the Patreon link, which is also in the description of this video. Once again, thank you for watching.